Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the First Baptist Huntsville, Alabama Young Adults Podcast. I am your host, John Lemons, and this is our podcast series, Black, White, and Red All Over. We are in episode 10 of our third season, and I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-hosts, Ethan McVay, Tiffany Fanning, and Ellyn Christian. How are you all doing on this, for us, a wonderful Thursday morning? I don't know when everybody's listening to this, but for us, it's a Thursday morning. How are you all doing?
Doing good. Happy Thursday. I went to swap a load of laundry and I realized it's probably been in the washer for 2 days. So I had to rewash that load.
That's always the worst. I hate when that
So
happens.
That's cool. Yeah.
So I'm not the only one though. My family. That's good. Ellyn, how's it going?
I need a cup of coffee. I'm not gonna lie this morning.
You don't even drink coffee.
But I feel like I need it. I feel like I need some goat juice. Nice. I'm struggling. All right.
Yep. Well, just to give everyone an idea of how Ellyn's life's going right now, we do a show sheet. So this is like a little document we send out before every show, just so we know here's what everybody's going to talk about, and everybody always fills it in, and then Ellyn fills it in like 5 minutes before the show. And so yesterday I sent a text. I was like, hey, everybody, remember to fill out the show sheet. And Tiffany was like, this is a really hard show sheet. And I was like, it's not that hard. And I don't remember how we got there, but I eventually was like, Ellyn hasn't even opened the email yet to read it. And Ellyn was like, you put a read receipt on that, you booger? And I was like, no, I didn't even have to put a read receipt on it because I know you haven't opened the email. That's what I know. So, but I can't be too hard on you because, to be honest, I don't read all my emails. Tiffany will send me emails with like 100 questions in them, and I'll just pretend like I never saw them.
It's not 100 questions. It's a handful, and they're usually hard.
They are very hard. Yeah. So, Ethan, how's your Thursday morning?
It's been good. I did prayer breakfast with some of the students early this morning over in Madison City, and now I'm down in Birmingham. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So, we'll move into our highlight of the month. That's what we're going to talk about here. And in addition with that, I have a question for you guys. I want to know what your first ever screen name was when you first got involved with the internet or chatting or whatever it was. So we're going to go out of order here. Ethan, let's start with yours because it has to do with why you're in Birmingham.
Yeah, sure. So highlights of November, lots of them for me. So I am in Birmingham today because my wife Caroline got a job down here in Birmingham with Lewis Communications, and she's super pumped about it. It's been a great job for her, great coworkers, good environment, and so we have moved to Birmingham, or she has, and we have an apartment down here. And so during the week, I'm up in Huntsville still, and living with some church members, and then on the weekends I'm normally down here, and sometimes she'll come up to Huntsville. But it's been just a good move for us, and it's been really exciting. So that's probably my highlight of this month. And then my first ever screen name, this was a hard one, but I think it was for Xbox, and it was Dark Knight, which is like, Batman, because I love Batman, and then the number 22 because that's my favorite number.
I didn't know you were a Batman fan.
Oh yeah, big time.
But I love, so what our listeners can't see is it's Dark Knight with 1K, all one word. So, which is totally what you do when you do your first screen name. So,
because all the other Batman names were taken, so you got to find an inventive way to still be Batman.
Excellent. So that's awesome. All right, Tiffany, what's your highlight of the month and your first ever screen name?
So I had a few highlights, and most of them came from the middle to end of November. So I am a fully ordained deacon now. So that was pretty exciting. We had that ordination service. Here's my plaque saying that I'm officially official.
Deek.
That's right, Deek. I also had a birthday, which was cool, I guess. It was a birthday of a woman who's married with 2 kids because I didn't get a cake, I didn't get a card, I did laundry, I meal prepped, I got my kids ready for school the next day. So it was a very normal, hey, you're a wife and mother kind of day. And I got to spend a lot of time with family due to the Thanksgiving holiday. And that was a lot of fun. And my first ever screen name was from AIM, so AOL Instant Messenger for the people who don't know. And I think it was TiffBB27 because I was trying to be cute and my name's Tiffany. So I was like Tiff and BB because I shot BB guns and I wanted to be like a baby BB. And then the 27 is my birth date. So I was real cute. I think I might have been in middle school when I got that. Sounds about right. And for being a loser. Yeah. That's my shame.
You shot BB guns.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I also shoot deer, so I mean, I just had to keep.
Well, I know that about you now. So I could see you being a BB gun enthusiast as a child. Excellent. Plus, by the way, you have told me not to call you Tiff. That nobody calls you Tiff. So the fact that you called yourself Tiff.
I didn't want to use my whole name because that's weird and lame. And it was.
Yeah, you're dealing with the internet. That's true.
Dealing with the internet, which I mean, Tiff. I mean, how many TIFF? How many other name options are there really? But I think I didn't grow into not liking people calling me Tiff until I was older. So.
I hear you. Okay, Ellyn. Highlight of the month, first screen name.
Highlight of the month. I actually have a good one. So I helped co-chair the Circles event for CJC. That was a big, bold move for me. I love events and going to events and planning things at my house, but this was something way bigger than I have ever done before.
And explain it for people who don't know how big of a deal that is.
So we averaged in attendance 800 people.
Wow.
And we met with this speaker who came recommended to us by Susan Wessinger and Ann Stone, who was Jocelyn Edmonds was phenomenal. She was exactly who she was
really good
on paper that she was in person. And I have a huge respect for that now. We met with her for dinner prior to just like 2 weeks before, just so she could get to know like the CJC organization. We could tell her a little bit about, get to know her, for her to get to know us. So she was, comfortable. And so we could learn a little bit about her story and her program that she runs, Graces of the Place of Grace. Sorry. And, so it was just, for me, it was, she was so on fire for God, but not in a cheesy, it just was very authentic. And I loved it. I could have sat in the room with her and had a conversation with her for a long time. So like when we left at like 9:00 that night, we were all like, oh, we don't want to leave, but we've got to. So, so that was like the Circles event is CJ's biggest fundraiser for the year. It helps propel the rest of their budget for the rest of the year. It's a great event as far as people coming, and it kind of kicks off the Thanksgiving season for me. I've done Circles now for 4 years, maybe. So that was kind of a big thing for me. That was my highlight, definitely, for November. And my screen name, it was Dancer Chick 88, but it was not CHICK. It was like CHIK. It was like missing a letter because Dancer Chick was already taken.
So you were into dancing?
Yeah, I danced growing up.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. And then I was on AIM. That was where I first got my screen name. Mm-hmm. Was there.
So and for you and Tiffany, that would have been about 10 years old, probably.
I was 8th grade when I got on AOL.
People are still doing it then.
I remember very specifically.
Nice. So I was in college. I can very distinctly remember in college, everybody had a AIM screen name. You left it open all the time, and there was the like door sound when one of your friends entered,
Gosh,
and
yes.
all kinds of stuff. Like it
So
was,
nostalgic.
I don't know
yeah,
any of this.
You don't know
Oh,
any of
oh,
this,
Ethan!
Ethan?
yes,
Ah!
back
Ethan,
in
how
like,
old are you?
I'm 26.
mm,
Oh my gosh, you're an infant. You're a
yeah.
baby.
Well, I
True.
remember the first days of actual AOL too, because my buddy and my best friend in high school, he actually had a computer and had this would have been like 95, 96, had AOL. It was all dial up. I can remember sitting there and being so excited to get on the internet at his house, and like we would chat with people, rando people, which is crazy now.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was. I can remember all that very distinctly. So by the time AIM came out, you didn't have to have AOL, but you'd create this little free account, and it was just the easy way to chat with folks and everybody. I mean, everybody did it in college. I mean, it was like how you text now with your
Mhm.
friends,
Yeah.
but it was just you would have your AIM open on your computer in college, and your friends in the other dorms or whatever, you would like, hey, when are y'all going to dinner or whatever. It's the same way like we text now, but that was what we did back in the day. So my screen name, my very first one. So I've got a little bit of backstory to mine as well. So I, for some reason, as a kid, I was really into wrestling. Every guy gets into wrestling at some point, WWF or whatever. When I was growing up, there was a guy named Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and I just thought he had the coolest name. So I was like, I remember when the internet became a thing, and I can remember thinking like, whenever I have my own screen name, I'm gonna be Superfly, but I'm gonna spell it with two I's instead of a Y because it's cool. And then I put 24 because that was my favorite number as well. So my very first screen name was Superfly 24. It did not last long. I eventually moved on to Uticus 77, which there's a story behind that as well, but I'll tell that later. But my highlight of the month as well, much like you guys, the holidays. I mean, I love this time of year from October to Christmas. Like as I get older, I appreciate it more. I enjoy it. I love how the weather changes. I love how everybody gets all festive for everything. I love having a holiday every single month because it stinks when you get to January and it's like, oh, there's nothing until like Easter comes around. I mean, Valentine's Day and stuff like that, but nothing, no like major holidays. So for us, we went to Virginia, where I'm from. Went to my parents' house the weekend before Thanksgiving. Got to spend some time there. That was great. It's always weird going back the older I get and the longer I'm away because my parents are still in the house that I grew up in, and it's just always just strange. But as I get older, I appreciate Thanksgiving more and more, and I think it just comes with age. But the whole idea of being thankful and having a feast together with people that you love and taking advantage of that time. I think, I guess as I get older, I'm more and more aware of how shorter the time is getting. So that holiday has kind of slowly crept into like my top maybe two. Like I really do enjoy Thanksgiving more than I did when I was younger. So it was a good one, and I enjoyed it. I appreciated it and enjoyed it. This year was our last one with two high schoolers. So next year we'll have one coming home from college, hopefully, and not going to somebody else's house for Thanksgiving. So that was my highlights, and that was my first screen name. But let's move into our topic for the month. For this is our November recording. So we are nearing completion of reading the Bible. We're at the very tail
Whoop, whoop.
end. So what I want to ask you all is, what has been your favorite story or passage in the Bible, either that you read this time, or and maybe you saw something that you hadn't noticed before, or maybe it's just a story that's always been, or a passage that's always been a favorite of yours that you just enjoy coming to year after year, or whatever it is. That's the question of the month. What's your favorite story or passage in the Bible?
So this is what I thought was really difficult in the show notes, because when you're reading and you're recapping on just the month, and be like, oh, I didn't like the whole book of Judges, and it's easier to pick out a story that maybe stands out when you're reading a lot of harsh stuff. But when you're in the New Testament, there are so many miraculous stories, it's difficult to pick. And then if you put it all into like the overview of the whole Bible, there are a lot of really great stories. So my first instinct is to pick the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt because of, learning the Pharaoh song. Whoa, whoa, let my people go. Ooh, yeah, 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 yeah. In elementary school. So that's a great story. And then the plagues of Egypt, but it just feels like too big of a favorite. So I picked something that's a little bit more humble, a little bit less flashy, and it's the Ethiopian eunuch and how he's reading the scroll of Isaiah. And I think it's Philip comes to him and he says, "Hey, do you understand what you're reading?" And the eunuch is saying no. He's a part of, I think, the Ethiopian queen's council. So he's a learned person. I mean, he has the scroll of Isaiah, which we've come to know is it's difficult to get a scroll. It was very costly. So he could very easily be like, "Oh yeah, I've read it many times. I understand it." And he was humbled enough to say, "How can I understand it if no one tells me? If no one tells me the meaning of it?" And so I think that's my favorite so far, putting in a different context of less flashy, just because we all need the extra learning. I'm on my second read through of the Bible. I'm going through a third next year is my intention. And I still need people to come alongside me and help explain what's going on. So just a good reminder for me of, even when you're a learned person, there's still more for you to learn from other people.
Yeah, what's great about that too is it really gives you a picture of how the early church did scripture and did the Bible and things like that, because the earliest writings we have are Paul's letters, and we think maybe at the earliest those came 15 to 20 years after Jesus, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. So there's a 2-decade at least period where there's no New Testament as we know it. There's no writings that exist as far as what we consider scripture today. Now, I'm sure they had writings that they relied on for different things. Obviously, the apostles were still alive at this time. The majority of what we probably understand as the Gospels today were their personal stories, and they probably traveled around a lot telling their stories and telling their accounts. But as far as what we know of as the New Testament, they just didn't have that. So for 2 decades at least, the church met weekly, had church, had worship, and they had scriptures, but the scriptures they had were the Hebrew Old Testament. And so they would preach Jesus as Philip did to the eunuch, but they would have to do it using the Old Testament. And I do think that's something that we'd lose today. And you've talked, Tiffany, before about the difficulty of understanding the Old Testament. I think it's because since we have the New Testament, we kind of use it as a crutch, I think, sometimes in our understanding of Jesus, and we don't try to even find Jesus in the Old Testament. And that's what the early church was forced to do because that was the scriptures that they had. So just a additional thought there. I love that story as well, and I love that you shared it and that it's one of your favorites. Ethan, what about you, man? Favorite story in the Bible or passage?
Yeah, for me, it's really this storyline that we get like from Eden all the way through. And it's this idea that there is a place for us to meet with God. And I mean, that's what we were created for. That's what we had in Eden. And that's what we lost. And that's the big tragedy of the Bible. And then, John, you've talked about before how so much of the Bible is devoted to how do we get back there? How do we get back to Eden? How do we get back to this meeting place with God? And that's why in the Old Testament, the temple became really interesting to me. It hasn't always been. I used to think it was really boring. A lot of the Old Testament passages about the temple are hey, there was this basin of water, and it was this big, and there was this lampstand, and it had these little almond things on it. And I was like, well, that's okay. Who cares? Maybe the Israelites cared, but why should I care? And it was the first time I read through the Bible that I had someone teach me that no, the temple is specifically made this way to look like Eden. All the water
Right.
that's there
Yep.
is supposed to remind us of the 4 rivers that are in Eden. All the wonderful gold and gems remind us of the gold and gems that were in Eden, and the lampstand and other things remind us of the trees and just the bounty, just nature that was in Eden. And so all those things are great, but really what it's pointing us to, right, is that we are present with God again. And
Right.
that is incredible to me, that in the Old Testament, even, we have the presence of God with us. It's not like we have to wait until Jesus, but like God was present with his people in a real way, primarily through the temple in the Old Testament. And that's why my favorite verse of scripture for the past like probably 2 or 3 years has been one that we haven't read yet, but we will read. So I hope it builds your excitement a little bit. But it's from Revelation chapter 21, and all that whole chapter talks about is like the new heavens and the new earth, and it talks about how there's going to be this new Jerusalem. And when I think of like a new Jerusalem, it's like the first place I would want to go is the temple, right? Like that's where God has been present with his people for thousands and thousands of years. And that's where so many meaningful things happened. Jesus went to the temple so often in the letters and in Acts. Like that's the first place that Paul would go, is not to the temple in the towns, but to the different places where the Jews would gather for worship. Those gathering places were so important, and that's where he would share the gospel for the first time when he went into a city. And so when I'm thinking about the new heavens and the new earth and a new Jerusalem, I'm excited to get to the temple. And then at the end of the chapter, we're just hit with this verse and just knocks me on my feet. It says, verse 22, it says, I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And so we get to the end of the Bible, and we no longer need a specific place to remind us of Eden or to remind us of the relationship that we can have with God, but God is just there. And we don't need any symbols or reminders anymore, because his presence is that real and that personal with us. And so that verse, when I read it, I just didn't understand it for a long time. I was like, why is there no temple? Like, I want to see the temple. Um, and But it's come to mean a lot to me. So I hope maybe that builds your anticipation for the book of Revelation. It can be daunting, but there's some good gems in there.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, exactly right, man. And I same way, like I did not understand for the longest time that the temple was representative of the Garden of Eden. And I think the Bible Project puts it really well. They kind of say, first the temple and then actually the person of Jesus are sort of this Venn diagram. And if you don't know what a Venn diagram is, it's just like two circles that overlap. You've seen it before. And so Jesus and the temple are this Venn diagram where heaven and earth overlap, right? But you get to the what you said, Revelation, where there is no temple, where we've made it back to the garden, which is representative of our fellowship, our communion with God. And there is no Venn diagram anymore. It's a circle. It's because they completely merged into one,
That's good.
and it's captured in Revelation. And yeah, but you miss that, and you miss the power of what you just said when you don't understand that. Yeah, the temple is designed to kind of represent this place where we can go back and we can meet with God and we can be in the relationship we were intended to have. So yeah, looking forward to that as we get into Revelation here in December, which is a fun read also at Christmas time, by the way. But we'll talk more about that later. Ellyn, what about you? Favorite story passage in the Bible?
So as sometimes when we go through this, I always like put a pin in a place where I want to like go back and read more. So last year it was Hebrews. And we just did a study in Hebrews. And man, like I fell in love with Hebrews hard. However, this trip going through, I think I'm going to do a study on John. Like I kind of read I don't know. I know some of it's kind of, you read some of it in some of the other gospels, but I don't know. There was some stuff in there that I was like, I would like to tap into that more. I'd like to tap into that more. But my favorite part when we get into Gosh, well, it is my favorite because it's after the resurrection when Jesus comes to Mary, and she's in the tomb, she's working, she's trying to fix it, and she's like, "No, they took my Lord away," and he like calls her by name, and every time like tears. It like every time I've listened to that particular piece every time, and I don't know if it's the person who's reading on my side, but the way he says like her name, I can just imagine what her heart feels like when Jesus says Mary, and she like looks up at him, and I just can't imagine. I don't know. It just kind of gets me kind of emotional now. Like, Jesus calling her by name and that instant recognition and stuff. I just, I think that's such a feeling when you first accept Christ, and he calls you by name. And I feel like maybe that's the first thing you should hear is Jesus saying, Ellyn or Tiffany or Ethan or John. So I don't know. That's one of my favorite pieces. And I always forget about it until we get to that point. And it's such I don't know, kind of always hits you right when you need it. So, but John is, I think, a book I want to dive into more next year.
It's a good one. It's one of my favorites. Not just because I'm named after it, but also the interesting with the Mary story, who does she mistake Jesus for?
The gardener.
Exactly. And yeah, so that's another connection with Eden and
Mm-hmm.
how we get back to the garden and all that stuff. And yeah, I love that detail, that story as well. But I don't know that I've picked up on the impact of him calling her name and in that moment. So thanks for sharing that. So for me, so this is kind of goofy. It's not super spiritual at all, but it's super random. It's my favorite story in the Bible because it's just hilarious. And it's just one of those things like you wouldn't expect to find in the Bible. But it is, and it's there. And it's the story of Eutychus. It's in Acts chapter 20. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to get there in about a week or two. And it's a story where they're in somewhere in Greece or in uh, Asia or somewhere like Western Asia, somewhere in that part of the Mediterranean. And Paul's preaching, and Luke's talking about it because Luke wrote Acts, and uh, he says seated in the window. So they're in this building. They're about 3 stories high, and it's a hot room, and it's a late night, and so there's a young man named Eutychus seated in the window because it was hot. And so he said, seated in the window was a young man named Eutychus who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. And I love that Luke includes that detail because I think we all just get this idea. I can remember in seminary, guys being like, "Oh man, like I wish I could have like heard Paul preach." And like, there's just such this reverence in our faith for Paul, which is fantastic, and there should be. But I love this idea. Like even Luke was kind of bored of Paul's preaching, and he's like he just kept going, and then Eutychus falls asleep, falls out the window to his death below. And Luke reports that Paul runs out, everybody runs out, and Paul raises him back to life. And then he goes back upstairs and finishes preaching, like preaches until dawn. So I love that story because it's like, we've all been there. Like as a preacher, like I've been there when I'm like, oh, this is not connecting at all. And to know that Paul was there as well is a great anecdote, great thing to remind yourself with. And then also just the whole detail. I've used that as a joke before, like use this as a warning not to fall asleep in church or you might die. Uh, don't trust me to have the power to raise you back to life. So, like it's such a random story and it's in the Bible and I love it. And there's no way it's made up. You wouldn't make up a story like that. So it's just a great story. And so good, in fact, that my second ever screen name was Eutychus 77. 77 simply because I like the number 7 as well. So I put it in there twice. But Eutychus, I love, and the hardest thing with that being a screen name or an email address, which it was at one point in time and still is my spam email address. Nobody knows how to spell it. So it was such a difficulty having that because I would always have to spell it and then I'd have to explain it, whatever. The other favorite story of mine also comes in Acts, and we just read it, the Jerusalem Council. It's just a really good one because I think we don't appreciate how life changing it is for us. Like church as we know it would not be what it is today without the Jerusalem Council. And I think we also do not appreciate how big of a deal that was to get a room full of Jews together who, in their scriptures, were commanded to circumcise one another if they were going to be people of the covenant, and to get them to see like, hey, this thing that is commanded of you in the scriptures like isn't necessary for all people to be followers of Christ. Like that's just a pivotal moment in the history of the church, and I think we don't appreciate the conclusion that they came to that really paved the road for all of us to be included in that family as well. So it's a really wonderful story, and I would encourage anybody as you come across it, maybe in future readings or if you haven't gotten there yet, to really take some time to really slow down and understand what's going on and appreciate that story because it's a really, really, really good one. That segment kind of bled into our next segment, but let's talk about specifically what we read in the month of November in the Gospels or in Acts or in the epistles themselves. Things that you noticed in our November reading that you would like to share with our audience. And let's start with Ethan.
Yeah. I think first, like a general insight, and then maybe I have a few specific things that really stuck out to me. My general insight is just like reading through the Gospels in this way, where we were, jumping through three of them mostly all at the same time, and reading them chapter for chapter, and then reading the like one in the other books. It revealed to me like how much Jesus talks about our actions and like what we do, and yeah, I mean, what we do, who we are, how we treat other people. I mean, that's really important, and I think sometimes in the American church, maybe especially in the South, like we can focus so much on maybe church attendance as our godly action, or Bible study attendance as our godly action. But I think Jesus really talks a lot about, how are you treating the poor? Are you caring for them? And just for me, I was reflecting on like, honestly, how often do I even come in contact with someone who is homeless or who doesn't have the capacity that I have, I guess. Like, do I even put myself in a situation where I can care for those people and have an opportunity to love and to be action oriented, I guess, and really put my faith into works. And then we read in James, right? Like faith without works is dead. And so that was just a good reminder to me, that our faith, yes, is all about our belief, but it is also all about a belief that works and does. So that was kind of my general thought, just reading through the Gospels. One thing that stuck out to me a lot in John's Gospel, right, he has these 7 different I am statements. That's something that scholars have talked about. When you read through the Gospel of John, Jesus says, like, I am the bread of life. And so he has these 7 different times that he says that throughout the book, and they each mean something different. But in his account of the Garden of Gethsemane, when this band of like vagabonds, basically like hired hands, I mean, really, when you read it, I was taken aback. It was like they didn't even know who Jesus was, because they get there and Judas has to be like, hey, it's the guy who I kiss on the cheek. That's the one you're going to arrest. So like these guys didn't know anything about Jesus. I'm guessing they were just like some hired muscle, right?
That's a great point.
Isn't that? Yeah, that just hit me this time. I was like, they don't even know who Jesus is, and they're coming to arrest him and take him eventually to his death. And it's at that point, like, they're kind of questioning him, and he says, like, I am, not I am something. but like I am. And that's a direct like reference to God's name, Yahweh, which in Hebrew means I am, who I am, basically. And so he's kind of finally and clearly saying, like, I am God. He's not just saying, like, I'm the Son of Man, using some language that's maybe up to interpretation. He's just like, I am. And what happens? Like, everybody, like, falls over. Like, literally, it's not just like mic drop and jaws drop. It's like everyone falls to the ground. And just the power of who Jesus is really struck me when I read that passage. And I mean, the cross, the crucifixion, it's not something that was forced on him because, I mean, he's God. It's something that he willingly chose. Um, and then one last insight, this time from the epistles. I love the book of Galatians. I think it's raw and, Paul doesn't hold any punches. One of my favorite verses from it is Galatians 3:3, and Paul asks them, like, having begun by faith, are you now perfected by works? And so he's like, you started off your belief, your journey as a Christian by faith in Jesus, and that was like what was core. Do you think that now you need to earn your own salvation and work the rest of the way? And yeah, I just have always liked that verse because, again, it's something that maybe I feel a tendency towards. It's easy for me to think sometimes like, oh, God saved me back then, but now, like, it's my turn to pay up. Now that he saved me, like, I better be good, or else I'm not going to heaven. And really, that's like works-based salvation, just in disguise, maybe in our Southern culture.
Yeah.
And so I think this verse like just drives me to my own heart each time I read it, and it was powerful again this reading through. So
Awesome,
Can I just
man.
add something super
Yeah.
fast on Yahweh? So I know y'all all know it's a super sacred name. They don't say it in the
Mhm.
Jewish culture. They don't even spell it all the way out. So if you talk about Yahweh, it's usually like abbreviated YHWH. I really want to get that tattooed somewhere. I'm still thinking about how to get it incorporated and be classy. But I had read something on probably Facebook, and it was like, God is with us and wants to be with us, so that if you pay attention to your breathing, your inhale makes like the same sound as the yeah, and then your exhale is way. Like, so every time you breathe, inhale and exhale, you're praising God by giving blessing, or not blessing to his name, but you're invoking his name. So just your life breathing is a celebration. So
Don't
sometimes when
do.
I'm having a bad day, I do that.
Mhm.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's Yahweh.
Don't do it in vain, Tiffany.
Don't do it in vain. That's right.
Absolutely not. Yeah, no, that's the breath. And the breath of God being what produces life is such an important feature in the Bible as well. So that's a good thing to bring up there. And you are exactly right. Uh, they do not in Jewish culture throw that name around, particularly in Jesus' time. For Jesus to even make references to being I am is just that was why the charge they brought against him was blasphemy. Was because he seemed to be a lot looser with that than they were at that time. What about you, Ellyn? Insights from Gospels, Acts, Epistles, anything from this past month that you want to share with the audience?
I always kind of reading through the crucifixion this kind of close to Christmas. Always kind of, it's like a reverse
It's
thing,
weird. Yep.
Yeah. But I noticed this time how much we spent on the birth and how much we spent on the crucifixion. In my head, I feel like it's always been a little reversed. Like we spend a lot of time talking about the birth. Maybe, I mean, we do kind of talk about the birth a little bit, or the coming, I guess, really, all through um, the Old Testament. I mean, it's like an idea that you can't grasp. Does that make sense? And to me, it feels like this little bubble. But then I felt like when we read through the Gospels this time, the crucifixion, I felt like got my attention more. Maybe that's how I should say it. It was a bigger bubble. And gosh, man, every time I read it, it is still hard. It's not easy. It's always thought provoking. And in the theme of uncomfortable, which is how I'm reading, that's my theme for this year. I sat through and listened to all. I feel like I'd have to listen through the crucifixion I read through it. I don't know, just it's hard. I'm an emotional person, so I take things to heart. And so, we asked the question last time, would you be a Christ follower back in this day? And I just wondered, gosh, man, would I be one of those people yelling, crucify him? Like, I don't know. I spent a lot of time thinking. That question provoked some interesting thoughts in this side of the reading. Where would I be? Where do I stand? And so when we got to Thomas and having to see his hands and his feet and having to see everything, I thought, do I need to see it, or can my heart just not burn? You know what I mean? Like, where do I need to exercise some faith a little bit? Do I need to actually see the tangible piece, or can I just be? Does my heart burning? Does that suffice? So that's where I was for the Gospels. A little bit of doubting Ellyn, maybe, which I picked up on. What's her name? Tara Lee. She said that they never call him Doubting Thomas in the Gospels. That was a name that we all, named for him. And so she said that, Jesus meets him where he is, but not in a shameful way. And so I think that was important to note, that we have wrote the narrative that doubting is shameful.
Right.
And so I sat with some doubts of my own. And I don't know that I felt shameful. I felt uncomfortable. Yeah. I wouldn't term it shame, but so that's where I was a little bit with the crucifixion and the Gospels this time.
Yeah, in fact, as well, we don't talk about this as much, but John the Baptist had his doubts as well. So John the Baptist was in prison and sent his messengers.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
To say, hey, are you the one who we all said you were? Mm-hmm. Because you said you were going to free the captives. Here I am.
Hello, captive.
And Jesus sends a message back like, hey, tell John what you've seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised, which is a subtle message saying, you're not going to be freed. You're going to die, but you'll also be raised. So, yeah, John the Baptist was a doubter too. So, yeah, it's definitely not something, I think it's something Jesus welcomes and I think can meet you in. And I think it can be a place you go to meet Jesus. It's a scary thing. It's not fun. But I do think it can be it's nothing to be ashamed of, like you said. So, all right, Tiffany, I think I stepped on your toes earlier.
You really did, but I came up with another one while we were thinking about it. You're really the worst. So I am.
I'm glad that is one of your favorite insights and stories too, though. So
yeah. So the removal of the stumbling blocks for the Gentiles, because word to us, that's what we are. So that was definitely my first key takeaway, but I'm going to pivot like they do on Friends. Pivot. And I'm going to talk about something that used to bother me about the New Testament that now doesn't. So I was always bothered by how long it took for the New Testament to be written down by all of the apostles, or by the documentarians of the day. But something to keep in mind is that they didn't all know how to read and write. They did a lot of oral history, which I know you've talked on a lot before, John. And it's not like writing materials were just all over the place. They would write on whatever kind of scrap pottery was around, or little pieces of papyrus. I don't know if that's what they were using, whatever. But also it hit me while we were talking through on this episode that first of all, they had more important work than sitting down and transcribing everything that happened. during their time with Jesus. That's how they were out spreading the gospel, was being on the move and not sitting down and talking to people and boring them to death out of windows, I guess. But they had bigger missions. And if I were trying to write a documentary about my life or an autobiography, I wouldn't write it right now while I'm in the thick of living it.
Right.
You see nostalgic, generally older people writing down their memories and creating their memoirs for their family to pass down their traditions. We do a family get together every year up in Gatlinburg, or at least we did pre-COVID and pre-fire. I think it was like 2019 in Gatlinburg when it all just like went up in flames. And the 4 siblings who started the family reunion tradition, a few of them have passed away, but the surviving members and spouses would sit around a tape recorder and record their stories from growing up. So writing down these stories is something that you would do as an older person anyway, or when you're dead and gone, someone comes and writes your biography. So that's something that used to make me uncomfortable that now I'm not having issues with. I can see a little bit more insight to it. We wouldn't have these documents at all if they never were done, but they're God inspired. So it's not like they're not true, and it's not as if they're making something up and putting in fluff for filler. Um, so I just think that was really important for me this go around to have learned and figured out.
Yeah, that's great. Great insight by you as well on that, because I use this example a lot of times. Number one, anything that happens in your life that's monumental, you usually don't have a hard time remembering. Like, some people will criticize the writing of the Gospels and say, "Oh, it's like the telephone game," but you can't even do the telephone game, and by the time you get to the end of it, know what you started with. But the gospel, like, if you really believe Jesus was God and you walked with him every day, like, you wouldn't forget that. Just like, one of the most monumental days of my life was 9/11, and I can still to this day tell you where I was, what I was watching, what I did that morning, who called me. I can tell you all those things. Like, I have a very vivid recollection of that because it was a monumental day in my life. So, same thing. I mean, if you believe Jesus is God and you walked with him, like, you're not going to forget a lot of these kind of things. The other thing is, as you said, yeah, they had a lot of life to live. And number one, they thought he was coming back during their lifetime. And so I don't think there was a lot of priority put on writing it down. There was priority put on spreading that message. And so they would travel, they would speak, they would be involved in starting churches and things like that. As they got to the end of their lives, they realized, oh, I was wrong about him coming back during my life. But they were still so convicted that they were not wrong about who he was, that they were like, I've got to preserve this story. Right. And so that was kind of what was the impetus for writing the stories down. And I have compared it to, in the 1940s, World War II happened. And right after that, yes, we made a lot of movies or whatever else about it, but then it kind of died off as far as interest. And then the 1990s came around, and you saw Saving Private Ryan come out, you saw Band of Brothers come out, you saw Pearl Harbor come out, a whole bunch of books started coming out about World War II. Why? Because all the vets that fought in it had started dying. And people were like, we've got to tell their stories. We've got to be more accurate with how we portray this. And that was one of the things too, is, if you watch some of the old movies from it, they're pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Tame compared to probably what war is really like. And I think Save It Private Ryan captured that well. But that was something that they were able to do because also in that 50-year span of time, technology had improved to the point where they could do that. And the same thing happens with, writing these scriptures down. They may have written some of it down beforehand, and just whatever they wrote it on didn't preserve. But the papyrus and the other, I can't remember exactly. If I'd known we were going to talk about this, I could have researched it a little bit more. But whatever we have scraps of the Gospels on today were things that, in fact, we don't have the original copies. I'll tell you that. And it's because whatever they wrote it on at some point in time has deteriorated. But we know that enough copies of those copies were made, and we have so many of them. We're like almost we have more confidence in what the Bible said now than we did even 500 years ago, because we have more copies of it now than we did 500 years ago. So even though they were closer to it, we have more things to check and reference off of it. And the more we find, the more it corroborates itself, which is a really interesting thing in that as well. But the reason we have started finding more and more is because about the year 200, whatever people started writing things down on had improved technology wise, and became stuff that was more preservable. So that's another interesting part of that story too. We can talk more about that another time, but really glad that you picked up on that, and kind of some of the details you shared, along with, I've thought about this quite a bit as well. I guess this is my doubting John phase of my theological journey, but yeah, it's I would compare it to the World War II kind of, nostalgia and interest in that developed a few years ago as those guys were dying off. For me, insights from what we just read. So I'll share really quickly. We actually read this in the end of October, but excuse me, Matthew 18. Jesus has this verse where he says, whoever causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to put a millstone around their neck and jump into the sea. And that just kind of struck me this time because there's so much going on right now on social media and other places where we're told that we're going to offend people with the Gospels, and I want to make it very clear that there's a distinction between people being offended because the gospel message itself is offensive, versus people being offended because you're a jerk. The Bible does not give you leeway for that, and I see what I would call a lot of that. A lot of people just making their stands or doing their social media posts that really are about getting pats on the back from people that already think like you, rather than actually being a witness. I see a lot of jerks for Jesus kind of things, and I think it can lead to people being unattracted to Jesus, not because they reject Jesus, but they reject your portrayal of him. And that verse just kind of struck me. Like, how many people have we caused to stumble because of our jerk for Jesus witness? And for Jesus to say, it would be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and go jump in the sea. I just put that out there to say, like, let that be a warning to us, the way we carry ourselves, to the people we follow, to the people that we get our information from. It just really struck me, and I think it's a message we should take seriously that we do not. Also, I've talked about this before. The thief on the cross is a powerful story to me. A thief is someone who took something they shouldn't have taken, and so for me, that story goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden, you have Adam and Eve, who are living people who are told that they will die, living thieves who are told that they will die. And then on the cross, you have the cross itself becomes representative of the tree of life, and you have Jesus telling a dying thief that he's going to live. And so this is how we get back to the garden. It's this moment right here, and it happens on the cross, and there's parallels even with the blood of Christ, which he compares to wine. Wine is a crushed fruit. How do what happens in the Garden of Eden? The fruit is crushed when it's bitten into. So there's just all these parallels. But for me, that is the moment. And what does Jesus say? He says, "You'll be with me in paradise." He doesn't say you'll be with me in heaven. You'll be with me in paradise, which is how Eden is most often described. So to answer that question, how do we get back to the garden? Like, this is it. And it's this moment on the cross where instead of a living thief being told he will die, a dying thief is being told he will live. And to me, that is one of the most powerful moments in all of the Gospels, in all of the Bible. And then I will say this as we get ready to go into December and finish reading some of the epistles of Paul. Notice, first of all, as much as you can, read the letters of Paul in one sitting. Don't they're broken up in our plan over several days, but if you would listen to a sermon in one sitting, try to read these in one sitting, because you'll pick up on the message. I think a lot of our mistakes that we make with Paul these days are because Paul uses a style very similarly to Jesus. Jesus is known for saying, "You have heard it said, but I say." I think Paul does that as well. He's very good at, and we could talk more about this next month, but Paul's very good at presenting an argument and at first coming across like he's agreeing with you. Like he's like, here's what you know, and he presents some things that are going to make you, the listener, be like, yeah, get him, Paul. And then he turns the tables on you oftentimes and like really puts the challenge on you even as well. He does this in Romans 1, 2, and 3. It's really beautifully done. I think he does it in some of his other passages. And I think for Paul, I think sometimes he lays out admonitions and he lays out applications to the people that he's writing to, and I think sometimes we mistake his applications as admonitions, and I think that's why we get into debates over like what do we do with women in ministry and things like that. To me, like what he says about women in ministry in First Timothy 2 is an application to an admonition that he makes earlier. And the admonition that he makes earlier in First Timothy 2 is that everybody should be quiet. Everybody should live quiet lives. And then he begins applying what does that look like? And so that's what I would just say as you read Paul, notice those kind of things. Don't notice where he's applying something that he's already said earlier. And you can't do that if you break those readings up and you're spending, 3 or 4 days reading something that he wants you to read at one time, and that builds off of itself as you go. Because if you do that over a couple of days, you'll forget what you've already read that was kind of the foundation of the argument that he's making. So that's my advice as we prepare to close out reading the letters of Paul. Anything you guys want to share? Ellyn, I saw you nodding your head when I was talking about the thief on the cross.
Oh yeah, that just like connected for me. I didn't ever put all of that together. And the paradise piece, I just thought he would say in heaven, and you said paradise, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah, it's a great, and that's something that's only hit me in the last couple of years. But yeah, so it's a
I was gonna say
reversal.
something, because you're like, hey, read Paul in one sitting and what he says about women, and some women get told to be quiet, and other women get like ordained. They're deacons. Woo,
That's
woo.
right. Deek.
But also like this applies to the whole Bible too. Like you can't just cherry pick a certain section. You're gonna take it out of context, like what you say all the time. You're on the group me for our Sunday school class, and you saw that Jacob and I were having a heated discussion about Samson. And because he's like, Samson was the dude, man. He was like legit. And it's like, Samson was the worst. I mean, he was awful. He broke every rule that he was supposed to follow. Yeah, but he was great. It's like, no, Jacob, you don't understand. He took a Nazarite vow. Like he was somebody set apart. He really was supposed to be doing extra, not like really not all the things he did. He was awful. He's like, where does it say that he has a Nazarite vow? And I'm like, it says it when his mom gets pregnant, like he's gonna be kind of like JTB, Nazarite for his whole life, and he sucked at it. And then Jacob, I guess, has never read that whole section of like Judges or somewhere else, because I had to explain to him what the Nazarite vow was, which was interesting. I'm like, because it's not a place. It's like a sanctioned life you're gonna live. It's a vow for a while. So
Yeah.
Ellen's dying laughing, y'all. This text chain got so heated. There were multiple spouses who were gonna sleep like separate from one another.
Yeah, it was. That's true. That's true. And Samson was a turd who did a good thing in the end. But yeah, awesome. Well, we are gonna wrap up this show for today. As we do, we're gonna look ahead to next month. Let's talk about a little bit of listener Q&A. We had one question come in on our little questionnaire sheet, and it was this: progressive revelation is huge in the Bible, huge in all caps. Do you think Jesus always knew who he was, or was it revealed to him as well? What do you say, panel?
What do you say, people who went to seminary? Because I'm not touching that.
Well, Ethan, I can tell you what I think. I'll let Ethan start, and then if you have an answer, Ethan.
I don't have much of an answer to this. It's not something. I mean, I've considered progressive revelation in a broader term, like more as like God revealed himself to Abraham, a long time ago, and he revealed part of himself, and he revealed he was honest, but Abraham didn't know, like, probably that Jesus was going to come and he was going to be, he didn't know all the details, right? And I think the further you go in the Bible, the more clear things become until we meet Jesus, and it's like, okay, now things are really clear. But still, the disciples didn't understand while he was around. And then after Jesus dies and is resurrected, that's when the church gets it. Paul talks about how the mystery of faith has been revealed. And so when I think of progressive revelation, that's what I think of. I've never considered Jesus progressively knowing more. So I don't know.
I would agree. It is a debate in theological circles. There are some who say, well, if Jesus was human, then he wouldn't have known everything. And that's where, he was also fully divine at that time too. So, but I would agree with you. So progressive revelation is a term that is used to describe our understanding of God. Not like God's always God. God is always the same. Progressive revelation just simply talks about how we understand who God is. So it's really a term used to describe our relation to God, never really God's relation to himself. So God is not changing. We do know that. God is constant. We do know that. And if we're going to say that Jesus is God, he has to be those things as well. Now, yes, Paul talks about him suppressing his glory to some extent, and there's debate over what that means, but I don't think he's Jesus if he doesn't know who he is and he doesn't know what his mission is. And he seems, even from early on in his ministry, from what we're given in the Gospels, to know where things are headed. Plus, if he knows and he understands the Bible, we've all talked about how the Bible is this narrative pointing to Jesus. We get to the end of Jesus's life, and he's on the road to Emmaus, and he says, "Do you not understand all that is written in the law of the prophets and the wisdom, or the law and the prophets?" So he seems to have a very thorough understanding of who he is and what he's accomplishing. Now, I do think, could there be a bit of progressive revelation for Jesus in what it means to be human? I think maybe, but I think as far as who he is as God, I don't think he can be Jesus and have to come to that understanding, if that makes sense. There are some who take his encounter with the Canaanite woman or Syrophoenician woman. It's in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, I think, as so kind of the more liberal side of interpreting this is that Jesus didn't know who he was and the woman helped him see it. Versus, I preached on this a couple months ago, and I said he's not Jesus if that's the case. Really, what the woman did there was help Jesus explain to the disciples who they are and what their mission is, and so that's the way I look at it. We just lost Tiffany. So, anyways, that's my answer to that question. I don't know if it does answer the question, but I do think, and again, there's theological debate about it, but I think most people are going to say Jesus isn't Jesus if he doesn't know that he's Jesus. Any final words or thoughts for you? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Well, when you say theological debate, this is just a curiosity question. Are these in Facebook groups that you find these theological debates? Is this papers that you read in seminary?
Oh, it would be
I don't even know where to, I could Google when you say theological sources, I think reputable.
It's going to be
sources,
published works. So you'll have, commentaries or things where, when I was going through school, the Jesus Seminar was this huge thing with mostly very liberal scholars that took some very questionable stances on who Jesus was and things like that. So that kind of either commentaries or published writings. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about there.
But it would be something that, would you know about it when you were in seminary? I don't know. I can't even think of an equivalent of it. I feel like it's just this seminary to me is this curtain. Then I'm just peeking back. It's curiosity.
Yeah. You're going to walk into any school or setting like that with the, kind of with what you've been handed. with the setting that you grew up in or whatever. I would say yes, seminary is a place where you kind of get exposure to other thoughts and ideas, and you either solidify your own through that, or you consider other ideas. And I mean, I've done that throughout my life. My understanding of the Bible has changed. So you do want some of that to happen. You do want to come to a more thorough and faithful understanding of the scriptures. So you do want to be challenged in that way. But there's also just constants, one of which is uh, Jesus is fully God. God is not changing. So like there are certain things that if that thing is taken away, then everything else unravels. So you can't take that thing away, and you do have to see where that idea is reinforced in Scripture or laid down in Scripture and is the foundation for all things. So does that make sense? So there are certain things that yes, are foundational. That I think if you start asking, or you start taking certain interpretations, though you've lost those things entirely, and what you have is no longer Christianity as it's been understood for centuries. I feel like I'm talking very like high
No,
level
that's good.
theoretical here, but that's the best I could do.
Well, I'm not giving you very specifics, so I feel like it's fine.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good. That's good. Yeah, I'm good.
Do you have any final thoughts as we close, Ellyn? The show sheet says you're giving everybody $200 for Christmas. So
Yeah.
is that just us, or is that like our listeners?
Just wait when y'all don't fill out the show sheet one time.
Nice. Ethan, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think get ready for the rest of the Bible. I would encourage you. I think a lot of people get scared of Revelation. I would say you have read through pretty much the whole Bible, and that puts you in the best place you'll ever be in to read Revelation. A lot of the images and like imagery, I guess, that's used in Revelation comes from the rest of the Bible. It's not just made up stuff. And so now is the best time to jump in if you've never jumped in before, or if you're reading it for a second or third time, maybe, then I hope that maybe the context of the Old Testament and some of the New Testament letters will help you out. So
Ethan, you sound like you like Revelation.
I do. I think it gets a bad rap.
It does get a bad rap.
Yeah. And I don't think it's primarily about the stuff that our culture uses it for. Our culture talks about like, hey, so-and-so is the Antichrist, and the word Antichrist is never used in the book of Revelation. That's in 1st and 2nd John. And it's kind of used for fear-mongering in our culture and talking about how God is this big bad person who's coming back to punish everyone. Where really
that's what I was talking about with Matthew 18.
Yeah. And Revelation really is a picture of Eden again. And it should be something that Christians and all people are excited for and longing for, because they're longing for that relationship with God again. So maybe my second encouragement for you with Revelation is I think we all need to realize that we have some biases. I've talked with the students this semester actually about like, I feel like if we're trying to learn on a whiteboard, I feel like the whiteboard is already filled with markers. Somebody's just written all over it. So if we're going to write anything of substance on the whiteboard and all see it and understand it, we need to wipe off our whiteboard of Revelation. We need to get some of our culture and some of our assumptions out of the way before we jump in. So maybe that's my second encouragement to you is like, go in not expecting anything. And as much as possible, only take like what you've read this year in the Bible in with you and see how that might change your reading this time around. Don't try as much as possible, maybe not to think about like, oh, are these things already happened, or should I be looking for these things? But instead, like, try and just read it as a letter to some churches and see what the application for you and I might be. So
that's a great metaphor.
We shouldn't take our Left Behind readings into Revelation with us.
That is,
we shouldn't.
Yes,
be like,
that
hey,
is what he's saying.
Left Behind, and then go in. I love the Left Behind series. It's interesting, but yeah, not totally biblically sound, I wouldn't guess.
No, it's not at all. Like throw out the Left Behind and your understanding of that as you read Revelation. That goes with what you were saying. Closing it out, Tiffany. Buckle up. That's what you say in your show sheet.
Yeah, buckle up for Revelation and get down with the weirdness. Go read Left Behind for fun, and just prep for your 2023 readings.
Yeah. So you guys are doing it again. That's an important thing to say. You guys are taking some more people with you. Your Sunday school class is going to be going through the Bible together. Good luck with that.
Should be a good time.
It's going to be a big undertaking, but we're ready. We're going to do it. We're going to push through.
Yeah, I'm excited for you guys.
Even if they don't read with us, they're going to get the overview on the Sundays that they're there. And I think it's going to be very educational and get some good topics, discussions going.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, that'll do it for us. I'll just echo what Ethan said. Try to go in and erase that whiteboard. And really, Revelation has been understood in a lot of settings as a message of hope. So that would be my encouragement to you, is to see it as a message of hope at Christmas time, as we're all looking for hope, as we're all looking for the light in the darkness. So, but for now, we'll talk about that next month. This will do it for this episode of Black, White, and Red All Over. If you have found this episode helpful in any way, please give us a like or a share so that other people can find us too. You can also leave a comment, let us know what you liked or where we were wrong. We'd love to know if you have a question about this month's reading or anything else that you've read in the Bible throughout this year. And with all that said, I want to thank again Ellyn, Tiffany, and Ethan for being with us. We'll be back next month for the 11th and the final episode of this series. We'll be talking about Revelation, as we've already said. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you don't miss that episode or any future ones as we look to new series and new topics in the year 2023. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys next time.